Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Rafferty. Today in the Journal Club we'll be talking about the Crash 3 trial. A trial from 2019, so not very new, but it's a trial that I had experience looking at before, and I think it's really important for sort of inaugural talks or speeches on in the Journal Club to interrogate data and to interrogate very public studies. So this CRASH 3 trial looked at the effects of tranexamic acid on death, disability, vascular or occlusive crisis, and other mobilities in these head injury or traumatic brain injury patients. Sort of a worldwide study, and looking at if there's any ill effects of giving TXA, or is it some sort of wonder drug. So we'll chat a little bit about the summary of what went on, its strengths, its weaknesses, and go into our final thoughts. And this was the little graphic that they used for the cartoon to make you remember the Crash 3 study with regard to bleeding and the brain. So from this infographic you can see that, wow, tranexamic acid must be really good. This IV medication that can be given as a push for most of us, or if you read the packet over a given period of time, usually a gram or so, 2 vials. And there's a dose altered for children as well, a per kilo dose. So in this study, this looked at over 12,000, nearly 13,000 patients in nearly 30 countries in 175 hospitals. And this study was broadcast as such that TXA could save 1 in 5 people who would have died following a mild or moderate injury, and that it was vital to give TXA earlier, and it didn't really have any of these thrombotic or vaso-occlusive crises that the worry was there. TXA is an anti-fibrinolytic medication, and the worry was that would promote clots or vaso-occlusive crisis elsewhere, but this was not found in this study. Twitter had a reaction to this little infographic, and other people angry on Twitter put these extra parts on this slide. It said the results were from a secondary analysis group, and this was therefore underpowered. The absolute risk reduction was 1.7%. You know, so it wasn't it's not this 80% difference that they were lauding. And the primary study outcome was that there was no statistical difference in head injury death within 28 days with the TXA compared to a placebo. So their initial output was such that their study didn't meet their initial aims, but looking at their data in a more focused and looking for something way, they were able to contrive these images, which are not untrue. They are highly spun or altered information presented as a big thing. So there was all these sort of memes at about that time, 2018, 2019, no real benefit from TXA. You know, these sort of Twitter or now X realms of people talking about studies. With regard to studies and medicines, I highly advise everyone to have a look at, or at least a listen to through audiobook or whatever, the work of Ben Goldacre. Years ago, maybe a decade ago or so now, I was at a psychiatry conference, and I got a chance to listen and speak to Ben Goldacre, a really interesting guy, and has done a lot of work showing that the science that is done generally, not just within medicine, but within the pharmaceutical area, medical devices area, medical research in general, and all research in general, is that we have this propensity to always drive for a positive outcome. So if I go looking for something, I'm more likely to find values or data that would support the outcome that I desire to find. And this sort of these 2 books, there's Bad Pharma and Bad Medicine, or some other name very similar to that, and they espouse this and give examples, case studies of how drug companies mislead doctors and harm patients. And we're thinking especially of you know, the OxyContin, the opioid crisis in America, That's probably one of the most obvious and talked about and deleterious action of a drug company, in a manner that they were supposed to, cure pain, but created addiction and created a great deal of harm to a great many people. So we always have to worry and be concerned about what is lauded from someone who is selling us something. And I think that sometimes within our own field, we have a naive, altruistic outlook, and that's given to us by medical school, it's given to us by colleagues, and we're so lucky to have this outlook. But with interactions with business, with interactions with pharmaceutical companies, with interactions with politics as well, we must have a different outlook and a different mode of interaction. So when we're looking at the BNF, this is what we see tranexamic acid as coming in. So yes, 100 milligrams per 1 mil is usually a colorless solution in a little vial. And I'm sure it's going to change the manufacturer, or the little bottle will change as all our medicines are changing. And it's pretty cheap. You can get 10, so there's 5 doses for £15. So it's not an expensive intervention by any means. So if it is helpful, or at least neutral, this medication or treatment is appropriate from that regard. This slide was to remind me to talk about the other worry that we have with social media or open media, in that anybody can say anything at any time. And most of the things that are said most of the time are rubbish and probably useless. Is this person on Twitter trying to promote themselves? Or do they have a conflicting study? Do they work or are supported by a different pharmaceutical organization that may or may not have a different product? With tranexamic acid, is there another medication that espouses similar benefits without any deleterious effects? And are these people then shouting from the rooftops on their phones about not using this, or really interrogating this data? Or do they have a vendetta against those who are creating the study, or a vendetta against that company? So even though the people shout loud, it doesn't mean that they are correct. And in the same vein, the cures that are presented, or the treatments that are presented to us by companies that are creating them, are likely not a miracle cure. And I think that I've had a great deal of reflection whenever I brought my virtual reality headset to market. I was always cognizant that I shouldn't portray this as a miracle cure, or I shouldn't really push this, because I felt that was wrong. But then again, my product has failed and it hasn't sold. So I think that there must be some form of middle ground that has to be struck with, selling something, but again, not lying. And 99.9% of things are not a miracle cure, and we have to be honest and open, if we can, about how we portray these. So yeah, and then everybody, we as medical professionals, we all like to think that we're doing the right thing nearly all the time, or most of the time, and we get quite upset with others or with ourselves that that if somebody else does something different, that we don't agree with them, and it sort of builds this animosity and builds this distrust of this other group. But I think that within anesthesia, we can be reassured that there are 100 ways to skin a cat, and most people do well most of the time. And there will be outliers in practice, and there will be differences in practice. But I think it's our duty as we come through our training to look and reflect on what is working and what isn't working, and that we must ensure that our patients are always safe. But that there can be disagreement, and disagreement is healthy as long as you allow it to be healthy and don't allow it to get in the way of patient care. This was the other book by Ben Goldacre. It was Bad Science. I think I mentioned Bad Medicine earlier, but this is sort of his foundational work with regard to science, and there always being a propensity to finding what you've set out to find, and it's a terrifically interesting read and a great basis for any journal club to start on. So looking at this study in particular, the strengths were that it was an extremely large multi-center trial across a multitude of countries, and there was a great internal validity. They were well balanced, they were well randomized, and there was very low loss to follow up, and it was across multiple countries, and they looked at this very strict protocol, and they seemed to adhere to that quite well. It was a well designed and well set up study, and it had sensible subgroups, and this was all correct. And it was important that the study also was more of a patient-focused outcome, derived disability or death, in addition to mortality, because I think in reality, head injuries are such a complicated thing, but the socioeconomic costs lie really within those who are disabled, as opposed to laying someone to rest, which is very, very cheap compared to caring for someone in a facility for a long period of time. Just as a little aside, the tranexamic acid medicine and the placebo medicine was made in a town that was just up the road from me when I used to live in Abergavenny, about 9 years ago now, I think. And I always remember this road because it was so tight and narrow, that nothing could get up and down. It was just sort of a one-way street on a reasonably busy little village road, so there'd be trucks and all coming down there. But I seen that in looking through the data for the medicines that they were using. That was interesting to me. The weakness of this study were that the primary outcomes were of 28-day in-hospital head injury associated mortality, and I could miss a good few patients, and these were ones people that died beyond the 28 days, and some would have been due to withdrawal of medical care, and this could of course occur beyond that roughly 1 month time. And there was a small subset of patients who may have been discharged to another care setting who would have died then after that 28 days. But if you're thinking about why this should benefit people, it's to reduce the likelihood of a hematoma expanding, because we can't alter the primary injury, but we're trying to negate the secondary brain injury issues. And yes, so would there be any outcome related to neurological state better than mortality? This was a weakness that was thought about with regard to this study. And although continuing on weaknesses, the classification of primary outcome could be responsible to the clinician. There could be differences between clinicians, and there was no mention really of the pre-hospital interventions that these patients had. And this would have been a great variety as there were in evolving countries. The conclusion doesn't correlate with any statistical significance, and I think this was the core outlook of the study. Did not meet any of the initial outcomes, and the subgroup that is being espoused, there was probably an error in looking at these statistics. In conclusion, this was an enormous, well-designed, pragmatic study that had a huge outlook, but the TXA did not give this 20% mortality benefit, and this is wrong, and this shouldn't have been touted as a result. What should have been touted is probably the TXA is safe, doesn't really cause seizures, doesn't really cause occlusive crises, and that statistics, damn statistics. So always be a self-interrogator of these statistics. And I think with any intervention that we have in medicine, that there is a difference between disease severity and time and benefit of intervention, and there's always this sort of sweet spot for intervention. And then we can argue, should subset analyses be used to drive clinical? Thank you everyone for listening. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, and I really think this talk should be called "The Case of the Indecisive Antidote That Probably Doesn't Do Any Harm and I still use in clinical practice, but don't expect any great benefit from. Thank you so much. Bye bye.